everybody. Today we're going to do something a little different. So I am here with my friend Tammy Wagner, and she is part of, or she's a Barton tutor, and this is my series on what spelling program should I use. Now, full disclosure, I wrote a spelling program, so I definitely love spelling, but I really wanted to talk to Tammy about this because I'm not what I would call a Barton expert, and so she's going to just sort of go through some of the same topics that I cover in my other videos on spelling, different spelling programs, and just kind of break it down for you in the same way that I do. So very quickly, I like to talk about cost and teacher intensity, a learning curve, and different, is it an Orton Gillingham program, and do we need to or what student would work well with that kind of thing. And so I think I'm just going to give you the floor, Tammy, if that's all right. And it's you're on.
Okay, thank you so much, Hannah.
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me on. I wouldn't consider myself a Barton expert yet. I'm over 2 years in, though, and I've seen great success with my own kids, and have started tutoring one other student regularly just with the margin I have. And I'll start with the ideal student for Barton because it is going to be a more limited group of individuals than most of the spelling programs, including automatic spelling. And it is designed specifically for those with dyslexia, which is not common. It was also originally written for adults with dyslexia. So on the positive end, that means that for older children and adults, teenagers, there's not babyish elements at all. So you don't have to worry about that. Most learning to read or learning to spell programs that start at a very basic level are obviously designed for young children. Mm-hmm. But for the estimated 1 in 5 who have dyslexia, they need to start at a very foundational level with phonemic awareness, which Barton does very well. So to give you an idea of how bare bones we're talking about, this is a teacher manual. A student wouldn't have this, but I mean, it's, cream paper, black font. The student pages are on blue paper because sometimes those with dyslexia can find that a little easier on their eyes, just depending. But it is very bare bones. However, there are things you can add to it to spice it up, and that is really part of a benefit of hiring a tutor, or just as a parent tutor, something you would want to think about, especially with young children. So the ideal student it's really designed for those with dyslexia, but those within a normal IQ range. So those with some kind of cognitive limitation or something, it might not be good for. Those with extremely profound dyslexia, it might not be good for, especially if they have major working memory issues, because there are memorizing spelling rules involved. However, because memorization is typically more difficult for those with dyslexia, it does include a lot of mnemonics for those spelling rules. Something very unusual about the Barton system is that it fully integrates reading and spelling. So if you have a child who is stronger in reading than spelling, those reading skills are going to help give a foundation for the spelling skills, and they're going to mix as they go along.
I know I said I was going to let you have the floor, but that's my favorite part. Fine. So I do want to, I really believe that spelling is such a great tool for helping students learn to read. And then it kind of goes over, reading is a good tool for helping students learn to spell.
Right, and they're really going to help one another if you're not doing just a memorization approach.
Right. Right, I agree. That's one of the reasons why I asked you to talk about that, because I see a lot of Orton Gillingham programs that, focus on maybe reading first, and I know that sometimes you need to learn how to read a little bit before you add that spelling component, but I love that Barton really works. They call it Barton Reading and Spelling, and I love that it's together. I think that's really, really important, and it's very effective.
And you really wouldn't want to use this with someone who does not have dyslexia, because it is so incremental and systematic. Most people are not going to need this incremental of a step-by-step approach. And even with taking a student through Barton, the tagline that she mentions, Susan Barton, in the training videos, that is as fast as you can, but as slow as you must.
Right. I love that.
So, you really cannot write out lesson plans or a plan for the year. You can write whatever you want out, but you really want to go at the student's pace.
Sure.
Because the purpose is obviously mastery, not trying to keep with anybody else's schedule. On that note, something that is very difficult as far as using Barton is it does not go with your typical grade level standards at all. It doesn't go in the same order as most programs are going to. It's just very incremental. As far as the Orton Gillingham tie-in, Susan Barton was actually trained in 7 Orton Gillingham systems or methodologies before she created it, and took what she saw to be the best of all of those and made it a scripted system accessible to us as homeschool moms.
Right.
And otherwise, hiring an Orton Gillingham trained tutor might not be affordable for many of us.
Right.
Typically, you're talking about at least $50 an hour. Some charge, significantly more than that, depending on their training and your area. But you're talking about over $100 a week for tutoring. On that note, the Barton system, if you want to compare it to most homeschool, spelling programs, reading programs, it is much more expensive. So depending on what you're comparing it to, it's either a really amazing bargain or it's a chunk of change. It's about $300 per level. The first 2 levels are a little less than the rest of them, and they go faster, so that makes sense. There are 10 levels total. So quick math, $300 times 10, you're talking $3,000 for reading and spelling. But again, if you compare that to hiring a tutor, it is a bargain. And even the tutoring, though, if that's something you can afford to hire an Orton Gillingham tutor, it's going to be multisensory at your child's pace. Unlike a typical Orton Gillingham trained tutor that is going to determine where your child is and specifically devise lesson plans for that individual child, a tutor using the Barton system is going to go in that specific scope and sequence of the Barton program.
Right.
Some Barton tutors actually have additional Orton Gillingham training, although that's not necessary to use the program. It's obviously going to help them problem solve better. But there are many Orton Gillingham trained tutors that still choose to use Barton because it is so incredibly thorough. And not all Orton Gillingham tutors incorporate spelling the way that the Barton system does. It really leaves no hole unbarred. That said, depending on the student, it can take years to get all the way through it, but then they're at a high school reading level,
Right.
and they know the whys behind it. So it is extremely thorough, and it is definitely parent intensive if you do it yourself. But everything you need is really included. There's Facebook groups for homeschooling with Barton and Barton tutors that are extremely helpful. And even if you buy a used version of it, you have access, if you buy a legitimate version and register it, you have access to excellent customer service, to the online training videos, to other online tutor resources for free. The website is a little bit like drinking from a fire hydrant, though, and it's a little outdated.
Yeah.
To be honest, that was almost a turnoff for me, but I have a free getting started guide for parents that have some links and some helpful add-on things, some ways to save money buying used without, buying an illegitimate copy that doesn't give you access to those resources, and some other things. Because those are sharing some tips I wish somebody had been able to share with me all in one place at the beginning. I've just kind of learned in bits and pieces all along. So that is a general overview. I think we hit on cost. As far as doing it yourself versus hiring a tutor, obviously doing it yourself is going to be less expensive financially. And it just really depends on where you're at as a person and as a mom financially, because you might, paying somebody else to do this instead of spending the time yourself and just the energy and the brain power might be a better fit for you. And, life is so seasonal. Many of us keep realizing. But the training videos and, it's totally scripted, so you can do it yourself, but that does take time. The minimum recommendation for any Orton Gillingham intense tutoring for someone with dyslexia is at least 2 hours a week. Now, that doesn't have to be full hour sessions for young children. It's recommended, and this is easier to do as a homeschool parent, to break it up 20 to 30 minutes a day. You can get that in 5 days. But minimum of 2 hours. And then your training videos, for per level, it's about 6 hours to watch. You don't need to do that all in one session, but you do need to watch that. It's going to really benefit you as you go along. Even though it's scripted, the way that you correct errors is extremely important.
Sure.
So it is a commitment in that way. And then your extra learning that you do outside of it is going to help bolster your ability to implement it also. And there's a lot of videos and information on the Barton website. A lot of tutors also use David Kilpatrick's Equip for Reading
I just
Success.
bought it. I was like, oh, I've got to tell Tammy. It's in the mail. I'm waiting for it.
It's not specifically about just dyslexia, but it really explains how our brains process words and the orthographic mapping process, how words become sight words that we recognize by sight and we don't have to sound them out. That happens a lot faster for those without dyslexia than those who do have dyslexia. But the same basic idea, is how we learn. And the more pathways to the brain, the better. Many people will orthographically map a word in 3 to 4 exposures. Depending on the person's type of dyslexia and degree of dyslexia, it could take 100 times with multisensory implementation. So an Orton-Gillingham program is so highly recommended and successful, and there's a lot of research behind it. In fact, I love that on the Barton website, they actually show research for Orton-Gillingham methodology and then list programs that are specifically other good Orton-Gillingham programs. And they'll also tell you if you call them and if it's not a good fit for your child because of whatever form of dyslexia or additional challenges your child has. A typical lesson, which is not the same as a session, okay? If you do even an hour-long session with an older kid that can handle it, you might not get through a whole lesson. There are times that one Barton lesson has taken us 3 to 4 weeks. With my kids. But a lesson is going to go through these different components. There's going to be review. There's going to be a phonemic awareness activity. We'll mention that a little more in a moment because that's very unique to Barton as far as really heavy on the phonemic awareness foundation from other programs I've looked at anyway. Then there's a new teaching. Then you're going to read a real word on tiles. They're letter tiles. I don't have them handy right now, but they're different colors for consonants and vowels, and then suffixes when you get there, and digraphs. And there's going to be more letters sometimes on a tile, but a tile represents a sound component. So you're going to read on tiles and then spelling on tiles. And with the spelling, not only are you using the tiles, which are obviously both visual and kinesthetic, meaning that they're touch or movement oriented, but you're going to finger spell. So if I would say the word cat for my child, when we're at like level 2, where that's what we're doing, I would say it, and there's a lot of gestures, so you're not saying words in between, so they can hold those sounds in their mind. Cat, and then the child would say cat, and then we would slow it down. Cat. How many sounds do we hear? Finger spell it. At, and then we're going to bring down a tile for each of those sounds. So, and as the procedures, are carried over throughout the levels, even though they change a little bit as you get to more complex. So after reading on tiles, spelling on tiles, then reading non-words on tiles, spelling non-words on tiles, then reading words on paper, spelling words on paper, reading phrases, spelling phrases, reading sentences, writing sentences, reading stories, and we're not writing stories yet.
One thing at a time.
Yes, but even still, going through those components, like I said, depending on the new teaching and depending on the student, can take a long time.
Yeah.
And you really want to reinforce all along with games and other things. Again, you're going for mastery. So there is a lot to it. One of the criticisms of Barton is that it is boring. I would liken it to brain surgery, though. If there is somebody operating on my body any place, I don't care if they're boring. I want to know that they're good at what they do.
Right.
And Barton is it actually, there's research out there that Orton Gillingham tutoring for someone with dyslexia actually does rewire the brain as far as forming different areas for the reading and spelling to take place. So it's obviously less invasive than brain surgery, but it really is changing those pathways. And part of that is the power of habit, because you get these procedures ingrained, you've got the multisensory going, and they know what to expect. So that part isn't hard every time. There's not a ton of bells and whistles, and depending on the child, you can add different things. And I mentioned those again in my Getting Started guide, which is available for free.
I'll put a link for that in the description below.
Okay.
And again, with boring, I think that people need to remember that we want students to succeed. That's the goal. The goal is not to have a fun time. The goal is to be able to read and spell. And as you said, I mean, we can make pathways or create new pathways and use kinesthetic and play games and things. But at the end of the day, whatever is effective really becomes what is motivational. So if a student sees, oh, hey, I've never read this word before and I'm able to read it now, or I didn't know I could spell this word, and look, I just wrote it down. That's motivational. That's what makes it not boring, in my opinion.
Right. And obviously, on the part of the teacher or tutor, and that's something as a parent that you might have to fake it till you make it for a while. I did. But, just seeing the fruit of it, and okay, my child is gaining confidence and is able to read, and we tried all kinds of things, and just CVC words, it doesn't make sense in my brain why, if a child doesn't know knows the letter sounds, has been exposed to a literacy rich home environment, why they can't blend it together. But that's a phonemic awareness skill that most people have naturally, that those with dyslexia often do not. So their brains have to be trained to be able to do that. And yet it is rewarding. That's, I call my little tutoring organization Light Bulb Moments Tutoring, because I love seeing those light bulbs go off.
Oh, me
and
too.
that
That's
is a
my
fitting
favorite part.
reward for learning, is getting to actually have that mastery. And it's amazing to see. And obviously games help reinforce, and when there is a fun factor, it helps those endorphins to make those teachings come alive a little bit more. But so much of that is more about the teacher or tutor, the parent's attitude and disposition about it than the extra stuff. And the specific, graphics that are used or whatever. Even those things can be fun. And I mean, we do silly things like, when we're doing the sight word again, I'll put it at the back of the pile. So then all of a sudden they say again, I'm like, okay. And they're like, no. And just silly stuff. And some of it just has to do with, like I said, our attitude about it. And on the flip side, sometimes for someone, especially with a learning disability, that area is hard for our kids. And when do we most often struggle with a bad attitude? When something's hard for us and when we can't do it, right? And so sometimes that's a hard on the parent-child dynamic. For us, so far, it has worked out well. I think it's actually been a bonding point, which is really neat. But that's one reason some parents hire tutors. There's just no, each situation is so individual. With a child that has some other learning issues or more severe dyslexia, especially, the more experienced the tutor and, the more resources that they've already compiled to help make things work, sometimes that's going to be a better fit. Right. And many tutors actually started out tutoring their own kids, and they saw the success of it, enjoyed doing it. They've already figured out how to do this and done all the training. So, that's my story is, then starting to tutor others. So I'm just kind of looking at your questions. You mentioned about, on that end, certification and tutoring others. Once you buy Barton, you really can be able to tutor others in person without any additional cost. Online tutoring does come with additional costs because you need to use something to have the tiles and make the different pages accessible. Wizimo is one option, and there's a per level fee, and there's a yearly fee, and there's a setup fee, and it ends up being several $100s. I also had to upgrade my internet connection and some of my other technology to be able to make it work online. Um, Susan Barton has a nuts and bolts class. I haven't taken it yet just because I only have the one regular student right now. But there are some other classes you can take. There's even a $30 one from another Barton tutor to just show you some tips practically for doing gestures for teaching online and stuff like that. But really, to do it in person, you wouldn't really have any additional costs. And sometimes parents, if you had a local parent that also wanted to do this, you could share it. You could share
Yeah.
the tutoring responsibilities. There's some different ways to people can help each other if they're local to each other, especially. So that's definitely a possibility. And on that note, if you realize that other spelling programs haven't worked for your kid, and you have Orton Gillingham on your radar, but don't know how you could even afford to do Barton yourself. I've always had to work part-time at least to for my homeschooling. And now with dyslexia in place, that's even more the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a list of work from home, flexible, legitimate, non-sales opportunities I can send you for free also, if that's a need. Because if our kids need this level of intervention, it's something we want to be able to do for them.
Right. I think that's great that you offer that, because it's hard to wade through all those ideas and see which ones actually work, and
You don't want to use everything else if you know that dyslexia is going on and you just keep on hitting a wall. You don't want to keep using something that's not working. And if you jump curricula too much, you're really going to I've heard the phrase wasting your child's hope.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to really struggle to get buy-in for another one yet. So I know people that try everything else before they get to Barton with the child with dyslexia. And by the time they get to it, the child is just done trying because nothing else has been successful. On that note, they do have a free student screener and tutor screener. If you wanted to tutor your own child, you would need to be able to pass this just to know that you can hear sounds correctly and produce sounds correctly for your child. And the student screener, even if you're totally opposed to Barton for whatever reason, it's free to use, and it gives you an idea of whether your child is even ready for an Orton Gillingham program with their phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness is kind of they're a set of pre-reading skills that has to do with manipulating sounds. And if your child can't do that, they're not ready to learn to read yet with any program. And I actually really wish some other reading programs that say they're dyslexia friendly would have a similar screener. A popular one, All About Reading, their level 1 is like Barton levels 2 and 3. It goes faster, but it starts there. So it misses even the Barton level 1 phonemic awareness. And some kids aren't ready for that. And they need another program such as LIPS from Linda Moo Bell, which you need a trained tutor for usually. It's not cost effective to do the training and own it yourself to use with your kid, or Foundation in Sound, which I believe you have used.
Yeah, I used that with my son, and it was great. We just needed some little extra oomph for he was really struggling with TH sounds and, some of those things, and that really
if they're not
helped.
hearing those sounds properly, then learning to read and spell is just not going to happen until you plug those holes.
Right. And it wasn't too expensive. I was able to borrow it from a friend, but she bought it for her daughter, and then she sold it after I used it. So she got all the money back, and then was able to go on to the next, or to, I think, the first level of Barton.
Well, and that's a huge point too. With Foundation in Sound and with Barton, there is a huge resale value. So when I say, I should have maybe said that at the beginning, but you're not talking about spending $3,000 and you're out that money forever. You can buy the first couple levels, and then as your child progresses past it, if you don't have other children with whom you suspect dyslexia and you think you'll need it, and you don't have any desire to tutor others, you can be selling those maybe at $50 less, but still, then you can buy the next level and keep upgrading that way. There is a huge resale value, so that is significant. They're not consumable resources, so that's huge as far as affordability goes too.
I'm trying to see if I think we covered most everything. I'm so glad we've tried this several times. It finally worked. So I'm so glad that we were able to sit down and talk about this. And again, I really love Barton. I think that it's a great program for lots of students who are really struggling, and I like what you said. I see this too. People say, "Oh, well, I'm going to try All About Reading," and then that doesn't work. And then they say, "Oh, I'm going to try this other program." Oh, that doesn't work. And then they finally get to Barton. But you said, at least in the last time we talked, that you're kind of just wasting time. It's really better if you think that they're really going to need a lot of intervention. Barton is probably it's cheaper and more time effective to just jump into Barton than to wait.
Yeah, and the thing is that even though any other, systematic program is going to cover all the bases to some extent, Barton, I think, goes further than most of those other programs by the time you get to level 10. But, there's going to be some overlap, but, just like if you switch math programs, they're going to be a little different scope and sequence. So you don't want to jump in too far ahead and not get how they teach and word a certain thing. And when a system builds, but at the same time, it's going to be frustrating for a kid if they already know the stuff, half the stuff in the level, and it's just something that's harder to jump in part way to. So, just depending on a child's degree of dyslexia and their age, I wouldn't recommend that just for maturity issues and just the baby, if you have a child that's already 7 or 8 years old, I wouldn't start them with All About Reading, because the earlier levels of it are intended for younger children, and you don't want to insult their intelligence. But I would really, really encourage a phonemic awareness assessment if you have a child with dyslexia before you start something. The Barton Screener, and then you can request the Barton Level 1 post-test. And you might be surprised at some of the stuff your child can't do as far as manipulating phonemes. And if they don't get those holes plugged, it's kind of like you're lifting a dead load instead of using a simple machine like a ramp or a pulley or a wheel. And we don't want to have to lift dead loads or expect our kids to do that unnecessarily when we can easily offer them a pulley. So that's what Phonemic Awareness Foundation is kind of like, in my opinion.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time several times to meet with us and just talk about this program. I think it's a great program, and I just felt like it would be better to have somebody that has actually used it talk about it than me. So I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. You've got several kids and several things on your plate, but I appreciate all that you've done for us. And yeah, I think, was there anything else you wanted to say?
I don't think so. I think that covered it. Parents can reach out to me if they suspect dyslexia in their child and they're not ready to spend thousands of dollars for a formal evaluation and maybe have trouble getting that through their school district. I do dyslexia screenings and homeschool parent consultations that are dyslexia friendly. So you could reach out through my Facebook page is the best way to get a hold of me there. And I appreciate your time, Hannah, and what you've done with automatic spelling. My non-dyslexic kid, we kind of stopped formal spelling a little earlier than maybe we should have. He orthographically maps words quickly. We've started going through Barton just because I have it, kind of in a rapid pace with the rules and stuff. But I've actually purchased automatic spelling for him because he can do a lot of that independently this year. So
I'm so excited.
We're looking forward to that.
I'm excited to hear how that goes for you. And yeah, I will talk to you later. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Hannah.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation that I had with Tammy Wagner. It was fun to talk about Barton, so I just want to go over everything at a glance here. So the cost of the Barton Reading and Spelling program is about $300 per level, except for the first two. They're a little cheaper. There are 10 levels total. There is a high resale value though, so you may have to put some money up front, but you can always sell it later and you retain most of that cost. It is a thorough Orton-Gillingham approach to reading and spelling, specifically designed for students with dyslexia. There's not really a gimmick with this one, but it is a multi-sensory Orton-Gillingham approach to teaching reading and spelling. It is a very intensive program. It takes about 6 hours of training per level, plus lesson planning each day. That's not to say that parents can't do it. Parents do that all the time, but it does take some work. It's not one of those spelling programs that you can just open and go. The learning curve is high. Many parents consider hiring a Barton tutor, but there are scripted lesson plans and training, and parents can definitely learn how to use Barton, and many do. It's definitely a way to save money to teach it yourself. The daily duration, I don't have daily, but they suggest 2 hours per week minimum. So that equals out to about a half an hour a day, 20 minutes a day, to work through all those lessons. It is definitely an Orton Gillingham approach. Tammy Wagner said that Barton was trained in 7 different Orton Gillingham programs, and then she took all the best of them and created them to make this program, or used all of them to make this program. They do teach phonograms. They have letter tiles. Some of them have vowel teams, or letter teams that work together, and so they definitely do a lot with phonograms. Spelling rules, yes, there are lots of spelling rules with mnemonic devices to help them remember them. It is definitely multisensory. They use tiles, colored tiles, letter tiles. They write and they read and much more. It's very multisensory. There are some technology things available, definitely training, video training for parents. The ideal student is a student with dyslexia. It is not really created for a student without dyslexia, because it is very thorough and very, it just increases very, in just baby steps along the way. So a student who doesn't need all that practice may not respond well to Barton. It is not ideal for a student with possibly with severe dyslexia, although I do know that many children with severe dyslexia, this is the only program that has worked for them, or a student with a low IQ, or maybe a student with low working memory. That's all I have for you today, guys. I will talk to you next time.